I'm Mary Rowe from CUI, and here we are, budget 48 hours later. Let's see what we really try to understand about what the significance is of this transformative generational budget, particularly on cities and places across the country. Really pleased to have four folks joining us who know more about this than any of us, and that they would take time to enlighten us about what their particular perspective is, what expectations have been met, what have been disappointed. And I think also, just for those of us that have been around a while, we know that a budget gets announced, but now the real work begins. And the federal bureaucracy, I know there'll be many, many, many of them on the call with us listening today with great interest. They are now challenged with how to make any of this all happen. What the government wants to have happen, they have to design it and program it, and we're all here to provide best policy advice and program advice on how they can best do that. So I think I was just saying in the green room that I think this is almost our 300th City Talk, which is kind of fabulous that so many folks have gathered for so many conversations from the early days of the pandemic, and here we still are having a talk about places and cities and how things actually land on the ground. And so thank you for all of you that are super city talkers who have been on almost all of them. There are a handful of you that are so loyal. We appreciate that. And then we pick up others who attend. And then, as you all know, we tape these sessions and then they get rebroadcast and picked up on in university curriculums, and I hope in high school curriculums too, because it's interesting to me how much, even if you go back to 2020, 2021 and see some of the topics and folks that have come on City Talk to talk about these issues, it's all still pretty current, folks. None of these challenges are quick fixes, and we need to always be reminding ourselves that we learn most from each other, and that we, what's that expression? We learn faster, fail faster, and then innovate faster as well. And that's the business CUI's in, is the connective tissue business. I happen to be in Toronto today, which is the traditional territory of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples, and specifically the Treaty 13 community, including the Mississaugas, the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples. And we continue to look, and I'm sure that what we talked about today is the extent to which the budget addresses and continues to advance what reconciliation looks like with Indigenous peoples working and living in communities across the country. So thanks for joining us, and I'm going to ask the gang of four to put their cameras on, and we'll start with a bit of an opening comment about what you saw and or what you read or what you're hearing. Also, I know that there's always lots of post-budget churn too, so we learn a lot after the fact. And as I say, it ain't over till it's over, and this year as hell isn't over, just saying. So let's start. Gordon, you're a newcomer to City Talk, and so is Sean. So I'm going to let you two watch as a model City Talker demonstrates how an opening a salvo is offered. So let's go to Carolyn Weitzman, who has been on several City Talks, knows the drill, and has a very particular perspective, I know, about housing and where this budget has gone. But also, Carolyn, just remind people where you happen to be today, and then give us a little bit of an overview about, our adage at CUI is what's working, what's not, what's next. Why don't we say that for the budget? What do you think is good? What do you think wasn't so good? And what do you think we need to focus on going forward? To you, Carolyn, welcome again to City Talk.
It's lovely to be here, Mary. So what works? I think the direction of Build Canada Homes is a great one, using public land for public good, talking about financing for deeply affordable non-market and supportive housing, yay. Talking about industrial construction, absolutely overdue. We seem to be doing a bit of nostalgia with Gang of Four, which was a great Canadian band. I'm now going to talk about, just saying, the old ad, "Where's the beef?" I was looking at the budget and I was going, where's the zeros? Because the target of 4,000 homes over 5 years will not be making a dent on the federal desire to double home building to about 480,000, nor will it have an impact on the numbers I've calculated for the Federal Housing Advocate of the need for 200,000 new non-market homes a year, about a third of them deeply affordable, if we want to actually end homelessness and housing need in a generation.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Did you like that? Where's the money? Here's the money. There's the money. Like that was kind of what we were getting at.
It was
As we
cute.
say, you know, it's sort of a line in. It's a what is that? Don't want to mix too many metaphors, but it's a line in the sand, I guess, or you know, they're putting a flag up saying here are our intentions, and I think this is our job as civil society and all the different roles we play to kind of hold them accountable. Well, how can you do it? Can you do it? Carol, you've been on City Talk too, so I'm going to get the two gals who know the platform well, and then we'll go to Gordon and Sean. So, Carol, what's your particular perspective? Although I did do a quiz beforehand, I checked how many times municipalities is in the budget, and I also checked how many times cities is in the budget. Not very many times. Just saying.
Yes.
Over to
Yeah,
you.
well, thanks, Mary, for having me on. Congrats on this being the close to 300th City Talks. Fabulous. It's fabulous. It's a great conversation, and we need to be having more of them. So thank you for the work you do to put this platform out there into the world. Listen, I agree in large part with a lot of what Carolyn said, and I think what she said as it relates to housing was really our takeaway on a grander scale as well. Agreed on the point of housing, but more broadly, you know, my feeling when I was looking at it, and I was joking in the green room before, is saying, you know, we felt like we saw a lot of the right words, and unfortunately not yet large enough numbers to back up that level of ambition. And that's a real implementation challenge they're gonna have to address down the road. You know, we were really pleased, and you're like, what's working, what's not, where do we go from here? We were really pleased to see some of the language around the recognition of the role of local infrastructure in economic strength, productivity, trade, housing deliver. Like the folks who are listening and your regulars and the people who orbit our world mostly, Mary, know that, right? That's a given. We know the role of cities in driving the economy forward. But it's not always been a given at a federal level, and it was good to see those kinds of markers down, at least ambition-wise and recognition-wise. The challenge is the level of investment in that local infrastructure did not match the scale of the ambition. You know, certainly wasn't generational, certainly not going to be transformational. And I want to say yet in all of that, because I think it is important that there was some recognition around those pieces. We were pleased to see some of the core anchor funds, like the Canada Community Building Fund, retained and going forward for a very long time. That is a great model of how to fund local infrastructure moving forward. We were pleased to see the Public Transit Fund moving forward, although some of those dollars have been repurposed, so we should come back to that at some point. But you know, for the hay of the $51 billion Build Community Strong Fund, much of that is repurposed money, and the net new dollars is really quite low. And as we already know, you know, cities are already sort of stretched to the max on what's possible. And so when you layer on what I think is necessary ambition around home building, around economic productivity, around resilience as a country, there's just no way we're going to get there absent a truly generational investment in long-term infrastructure. And so we hope that this is the start of a conversation about now a long-term infrastructure plan that will come and match the level of ambition. But if I'm being really honest with you, without it, those objectives, that ambition is really at risk.
This is sort of a theme the two of you have just set up, and it is kind of like, where's the money? And whether or not these ambitious targets are doable. I guess that's the rubber hits the road argument. How are we going to get there? All right, for their City Talk debut, we've got Gordon and then Sean. Gordon, why don't you go first? We'll mute so that we don't get an echo. And Gordon, just fill people in on where you are and a little bit about your sort of where you come from, where your perspective is coming from.
Okay, no, that sounds great. And this is such a positive, energetic group. Thank you for having us on. So I'm the executive director of the Southeast Tech Hub. We are Canada's only truly rural tech hub. So we do tech incubation, we do community development, and we do economic development in the energy sector in technology. I'm located in Estevan, Saskatchewan. Just to give you, so everyone understands when I say things, where I'm coming from. We are a coal town. We have the world's only carbon capture coal plant. We are oil and gas. We also are deep earth. We have geothermal. We also are pumping lithium carbonate from underground. We are turning our coal to graphite for EV batteries, and that's well on its way. We are the sunniest place in Canada. We're one of the, if you've ever been to rural Saskatchewan, you'll understand the winds are pretty powerful here. So we've got lots of winds here as well. We are also going to be the home of two GE Hitachi BWRX small modular reactors. So we're in all these wonderful sectors. So with that in mind, just something I think a lot of people should reflect on is where are you watching it? Where is the power? Where is the energy coming from for you to watch this, right? If you follow those electrons or the molecules of energy, it's all coming from rural Canada. And then when you look at the budget, they also, so they're talking about let's make Canada an energy superpower. Let's get into critical minerals. Okay, where are all critical minerals coming from? Rural Canada. So and then on top of that, if you also add on the piece is that there's a serious digital divide between rural Canada and urban Canada. I'm originally from Vancouver, came through here, and walking through that lived experience, it's shocking. So for example, if you take all of southern Saskatchewan, there is up until like last summer, there was no place an adult could take computer science. So what I was hoping in all of this, putting all that together, that there would be money that would be earmarked just for rural Canada. It could be in the labor development piece, 50,000 new spots, great. Something in that though, the SMRs that they're going to build here, that's 5,000 people, right? So do 10 of those, we're done. Also on that point is when you're going to drop in this massive workforce into a community, so 5,000 people into a community of 10,000 people, and yet you have no money for rural economic development, how are we going to handle the police, the fire, the medical, the housing, right? Do we even have the skill set in our communities to handle that? Because it's not just Estevan, it's everywhere. So disappointed, but I understand where it's coming from. No one ever has put money into rural economic development, like forced it in. And the other kind of piece is on the labor force is that if you think about it in Canada, where do you go to get your trades training? It's almost always in an urban setting. And if you read the papers, the peer-reviewed papers, the literature, if you want to have successful deployment or development or building of a new major project, you have to have that labor force developed within 100 kilometers of that site, or else you're going to just develop all these people who are going to probably leave our country or go elsewhere. So disappointed on that. But the overall direction pointing towards critical minerals, energy development, that's great for our community.
The reason you can see why I wanted to make sure Gordon came on the session because, and Carol and I live with this all the time, the balance of urban rural, and is it one against the other, and is it a zero-sum game, or in fact, are we interdependent? And at the Urban Institute, we define urban very broadly as being anybody that lives in a community of, oh, here's my version. If you can step outside on your back door and yell and someone hears you, then you're urban. And if you've got a good voice like me, that's you rural, they can hear you. So, but it's place-based. And I think this is the piece that's unique is that, and it's the challenge we all have, is that we have and we can come back to this, and I'm sure Carol will have lots to say about it. We have a governance structure that doesn't really see place, and it's highly vertical when we really know that we need to have horizontal and stuff on the ground. So we'll come back to that, Gordon, but that's why I wanted to have you, is to put the rural piece forward, but also the whole emphasis around critical minerals and where the economy is being driven by, and then how do we create that narrative. So Sean, we're going to go to you last. You're the big picture person, and I'm sure you're going to have a perspective on all the points that you've just heard the three prior to you touch on. So give us your perspective, and also just tell people a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, it's great to join you. Thanks for the invitation, and congratulations, as Carol says, on the success of the CityTalk seminars. My name is Sean Spear. In a previous life, I worked as a senior advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Today, professionally, my principal focus is a public policy and political commentary site called The Hub, where we publish opinion commentary, standard reporting. We have a series of podcasts on issues of interest to policymakers. My opening reflection on the budget is that it is making a bet about Canada's macroeconomic conditions in a way that distinguishes it from budgets from the federal government and provincial governments across the country for some time. People here will know that we're living in a small p populist moment, and that has caused policymakers to spend a lot of scarce resources and attention on what you might characterize as microeconomic issues, pocketbook issues, if I can put it that way. And the way to respond to those types of issues are involve policy levers that most of us are familiar with: grant programs, income transfers, tax credits, and so on. The Carney government, to its credit, is recognized that, notwithstanding people's real concerns about affordability and so on, that the secular challenges facing the country are macroeconomic. Our economy is growing too slowly. We're not productive enough. Our living standards are flat or declining. And so they've outlined a agenda to try to get at those underlying macroeconomic issues, and hopefully in such a way that it produces broad-based outcomes that then translate to people, such that it addresses those issues that they are articulating about their being squeezed and pricing and cost of living and all the rest. I think it's admirable that the government has taken this macroeconomic lens to the issues facing the country. As I say, successive governments in Ottawa and in the provinces have instead chosen to address directly what people are articulating. The big question, of course, is one of execution and delivery. Having articulated this big macroeconomic theory of the case, if I can put it that way, that the way to boost economic output and improve productivity and in turn wages and living standards is through a combination of major public investments in infrastructure, and then using different policy instruments, including tax expenditures, in order to catalyze private investment, involves drawing on public administration muscles that haven't been used for some time. That Ottawa has become very good at transferring funds to other orders of government or transferring funds to households in order to sustain incomes. It hasn't done the type of execution and delivery that this budget is calling on it. And so I think, as important as the direction is and the extent to which, as I say, it distinguishes its understanding or prescription, its diagnosis of the problem rather, is solid. The big question looms over its execution and delivery. Does Ottawa have the state capacity to carry out what amounts to a macroeconomic agenda?
You just absolutely gave voice on to the dilemma we've got, which is can I ask the producers to put all of us on the screen, and we'll open our mics and just have a group chat, because what you just did is lay out the macroeconomic view, and we're not all, but we're all very focused on the particular. We're focused on subsidiarity and how do we get resources into communities to benefit communities that our belief would be strengthens the whole, that we do it from the ground up. And I think this is always a challenge with the federal government that tends to come from the top down. So please, folks, put some questions into the chats, but I'm going to go right to, I guess I'll start with you, Carol. I didn't see a lot of, we continue to see reinforcements of transfers to municipalities. And, there are 16 references to municipalities in the document, 5 references to cities, and which is better than I thought, actually. I thought there'd be none, but there are 16. But when you read them, it's mostly about transfers, existing transfers. And here we are in a crisis in our country that is being experienced by people on the ground in their local neighborhoods. And for the first time, at least, we have housing being raised, and it is something that hits people at home. How do you at FCM reconcile this when in fact you've got to talk to the federal government all the time about something beyond the trickle-down model, right?
Yeah.
How do we get to something different?
Yeah, and this is, I think, the fundamental question that they're going to need to get to an answer to pretty quickly so that we can stick a landing on delivery, to Sean's.
I was going to say, we're the deliverers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, Sean, a lot of what you said resonated for me. very much so, including the fact that I would agree that the encouraging diagnoses of the problem, right, that's come forward. The gap that still exists right now, and I have to tell you, I'm going to name this pretty directly as a gap and speak to what I think the problematic elements are. And I want to premise it by saying, like, I'm optimistic we'll get there because there's been open recognition of what the source of the challenge is. And so, but the gap is how then are we going to deliver? And what was in this budget was from an investment perspective and some of the necessary foundations to delivery and across the country in the various contexts that exist across the country isn't quite there yet, and Mary, the point you're asking on the models of delivery, I'll tell you, it's a bit of a mixed bag in there. And so we were very encouraged, as I said, to see some of the anchor transfers that have worked very effectively retained, right? So the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly Gas Tax Fund, direct delivery to cities and communities across the country, leveraged extensively. Cities can plan for it, bank against it, like very, very helpful to actually deliver infrastructure across the country. The challenge is some of the, like, where there is some new dollars, those have been put into these streams of funding that we are going back to a model of delivered through provinces and territories. And one of the eligible categories in each of those models is also provincial priorities and provincial experience. And it's certainly my experience. I've been at this for too long a time, maybe, but a very long time. And our experience with application-based infrastructure programs that are interjurisdictional, that require provincial and territorial bodies to prioritize projects and approve municipal applications, is that, one, they're overly complex. They take forever to actually move the dollars. And ultimately, the envelope of what actually lands at a community level ends up being quite small because a lot of the dollars get siphoned into provincial infrastructure, other priorities. And so it is alarming to see us needing to relearn this lesson. I'm glad that it's the smaller parts of the portfolio that are in those streams. But I do think it is the fundamental question about how we deliver on growth across the board remains unanswered. And our position at FCM is to double down on the streams that are working. The direct delivery model works. We've seen it succeed. We know it can be scaled. It can be scaled quite easily. So and we need to move fast. We need to move faster than interjurisdictional conversations ever move. And so we're going to be pressing for an infrastructure plan that matches the scale of the ambition, that levers the direct delivery models on transit through the CCBF in other ways. And I'll also say, just because on the encouraging side, it is, we also share the view that the private sector has a larger role to play. It's encouraging to see them putting some thought and emphasis behind how to engage private sector levers in local infrastructure more. We need to see more of that. And from our perspective, we think there are great levers to pull on how to come at it from an innovative financing perspective as well. So we're appreciative that that's early days conversation, but happy to see that there as well.
I think, I'm going to come to you next, Carolyn, because what you're just describing, Carol, is this dilemma about the way federalism is organized. And Sean, I'm sure you have a view on this. As federalism is organized, all those layers, when you think on the housing discourse, how much we hear complaining about bureaucracy, delays in approvals, all the things that they lard on and complain about municipal government. But when you have something that has to go through the labyrinth of a provincial or territorial government, and then by the time it actually trickles down, literally. So here we are saying, and I think the previous government was doing quite a lot of this, the Housing Accelerator Fund did a leapfrog, rapid housing, leapfrog. We're talking about it more in immigration, that they leapfrog and deal directly with the local order of government. Carolyn, what is your particular perspective on this? Are we taking a step forward, or are we taking some steps back? And then Sean, I'd be interested to hear from your point of view from the 30,000 people.
Sure.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Well, I'd follow up on what Sean and what Carol said directionally. I think the budget's talking about some really good, really profound things. And one of those things that the government that the federal government has been moving in the direction of, and which I applaud, is a new sense of localism. Absolutely, provinces and territories pretty much have a stroke every time there's a direct transfer to municipalities or regions. That doesn't mean that local government isn't the best delivery system for locally based programs. It is. I think it's really important whether you're dealing with housing, which is my area of expertise, or healthcare or childcare and education, to start off with a set of principles, a set of targets, and then the kind of mechanisms that will build those targets. So with housing, I'm always saying who needs what housing, where, and at what cost. And the federal government was talking, the current federal government during the election campaign said, yeah, we're going to more than double housing to 500,000 per year from about 220 per year. By the way, we don't know because the federal government doesn't even track completions in non-metropolitan areas, which is horrible. But in any case, great.
You had to
More
just
than,
get that in there, Carolyn. I know.
I just like
the data is wrong.
the data sucks. Okay.
Yeah.
But you have these targets. Is 4,000 homes on 6 sites gonna get you there in terms of industrial development?
Right.
I would argue no. So if you're going, we absolutely need more home-built industrial construction in order to build a factory, to get the private sector investment in a new home factory, in order to hire people for regular jobs, and you will get a more diverse and younger workforce and happier workforce if they're working in a factory as opposed to entirely on site. That is necessary to scale up homes. Is a 4,000 target at all realistic in terms of being able to create that new set of industries? No, it is not. So I think I'm going to be very terse today, partly because I don't like being a black cloud. I like being an optimistic person. But I look at the budget and I go, great concepts.
Yeah.
Where the heck is the delivery going to be? And without some really hefty bilateral agreements that are backed up by targets, not just aggregate supply targets, but non-market supply targets, supportive housing targets to end homelessness, it's meaningless to talk about a directional shift. It needs numbers behind it.
Wasn't deliverology part of the mandate of the previous government? I mean, I think we're all just starting to focus on this. Like, how can we get things to deliver? I guess that is the challenge. We're all working in very particular circumstances in communities across the country of different sizes, and we need things to deliver to Canadians and people that live in communities that may not be a Canadian yet, specifically. So, Sean, how do you square that circle as a macro guy? How do we I mean, and let me just say, I appreciate all of us that a lot of the post budget is a bunch narrative is often a lot of gotchas. Oh, they said this, they didn't. It wasn't transformative. It wasn't that. I really appreciate that we're not doing that. We're actually trying to talk about the future of the country and how is our money being organized and how's our governance going to make communities better for people. So, Sean, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. People here
Sure.
know, at least as well as I do, but no doubt better, that Canada is the most decentralized system of
Right.
federalism in the world. So we have Ottawa collects a lot of revenue because it's the most efficient way of collecting revenue, and then we have a system of interacting with other orders of government in order to deliver on different public priorities. And that obviously is not going to change. And so everything that the government has articulated here is ultimately, or a large share of it is going to ultimately require arrangements and partnerships with other orders of government just by the structure of our federalism, which kind of comes to my second point. If something is unsustainable, it won't be sustained. I think that's a pretty useful political axiom.
Such
And
as?
our system of fiscal federalism is unsustainable. I can't tell you how it's going to solve itself. I can't tell you when. But if something can't keep going, it won't. And so at a time when provinces are spending 50 cents of every program dollar on healthcare, and that's likely to grow. When
Yep.
municipalities are feeling squeezed and being chastised for the growing use of development fees to try to solve for their budget woes. When Ottawa itself is running deficits outside of an economic downturn, in part because of growing demands on defense and security issues, you just get the sense that something has to change. Part of that is Canadians themselves reckoning with how much government they want and how much government they're prepared to pay for, and then trying to bring that into some kind of equilibrium. And then, of course, the relationship between the different orders of government having to be reset. We've not done that systematically since the Roll-Sirois Commission of the 1930s. An exercise, of course, that comes out of a period of significant transformation. And I would argue that we find ourselves in one that is somewhat analogous. Changing demographics, a changing economic structure, obviously evolving geopolitical context, growing demands and expectations on lower orders of government to be the tip of the spear when it comes to delivering core programs and services. So as I say, I don't know precisely how it's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but one gets the sense that this conversation 5-10 years from now is not going to be about the design and the quantum of federal transfers to municipalities on individual infrastructure streams. It's going to be about what's the relationship between Ottawa, the provinces, and municipalities, who does what, and what financing powers are devolved, so that different orders of government can discharge the responsibilities that they're given.
Well, you heard it here, you heard it here first, folks, from a former advisor to Prime Minister Harper, who actually, I think, fundamentally believed in subsidiarity. I think it was actually part of his approach to governance. And then we've had a number of different phases of this. But Sean, thank you for suggesting that. Carol, you're going to hang around for 10 years because you've had a fiscal framework document at FCM circulating for some time. You know, you're young. You're going to still be here. If it takes this long, I don't know. It's the thing is, we're back though to in the short term, we have to get some stuff done.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that, Mary? Here's the thing. So I first of all, here to what Sean just said and agreed. And actually, Sean, I hope you're right that you know something that it isn't sustainable won't sustain itself, because we've been learning this lesson in painful ways as a country for too long, in my perspective. Yes. You know, it was interesting. I had a chance to talk to the Prime Minister very shortly after he was elected, and refreshingly, one of the earlier questions he asked was, you know, what's working, what isn't working, what's scalable, you know? And essentially I found myself, almost surprisingly so, making the argument that, you know what, let's not have the conversation that feels too big and weighty and philosophical, and, you know, we need to get some things done. So let's just prove the model and get at it, right? And so at a really pragmatic level, you know, when you look at our housing objectives, when you look at our economic productivity objectives, you know, there is nothing unconstitutional or inappropriate about having the kind of conversation that Sean just described, you know, where we sit around a table and say, okay, let's agree on the objective, who holds what levers, and are they resourced to deliver, right? Are they resourced to get it done, right? And, you know, I honestly, it's not hyperbole to say I would think for a strong majority of the fundamental initiatives that we're trying to put forward as a country, the answer to that is that it's not aligned right now in sort of like jarring ways, really. And what is chronically misaligned is the execution and delivery. And so, you know, we're not going to find our way out of being this cycle without some real ambition. But I think it can be really quite pragmatically based to say, okay, you know, let's pick housing. Obviously, there's a dire need to address the housing crisis in this country. Let's have a conversation, you know, between orders of government across sectors, if we want to be even more ambitious, and I think we need to be, and say, you know, who holds what levers, what are we doing, and are they adequately funded? And how do we take the collective public dollar, leverage it as much as we can, and also make sure that it's being deployed as efficiently as possible? I mean, I think it's what Canadians expect, well, maybe not expect, hope government would do. And we've got to find a way to having those conversations. It can be on as pragmatic a base as possible. to make some progress. Otherwise, we really are not going to move against what are some very necessary objectives. You know, I think the moment of time we're in, from, you know, all of the stressors that we're facing as a country, geopolitical, the rate of tech change, social change, climate, which we haven't even talked about yet, and like even from a defense perspective, I mean, there is a real necessity to have a generational conversation about getting delivery right. And it's actually less complex than we fear it is. And I think there are easy ways out of the gate, starting, you know, it's going to sound very biased coming from me, and maybe it is, but I actually believe getting funding local infrastructure right is going to start solving for a lot of things very quickly, including housing. You know, Mary, I wanted to ground it really quickly in like some examples of why this matters so much. You know, I'm got this like bird's eye view of things across the country that are waiting to go. You know, Saskatoon, 1,000 homes ready to go, waiting for a wastewater plant. You know, small towns like go to Antigonish, right? 50 homes, amazing setting around a hospital, desperately needed in that community. They cannot fund a public road. Like that's the obstacle, right? And so like, how do we start connecting these very place-based realities on the ground with the national ambition that we're trying to achieve and make progress against? And that's the link we need to figure out.
You know, one of the little adages I use, and I'm going to ask staff to put into the chat, the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service that COI runs with government, because it's doing exactly what you're suggesting, Carol. It's making money smaller. And this is one of the challenges we have, is that it's often listen, it's a lot of dough, but the large entities are used to several zeros behind a check. And in fact, a community might need only a few zeros to actually make it happen. And how do we get the money through active quickly? Gordon, if, you know, those of us who've been at this for a little while, you know, housing used to not be talked about federally. It was always kicked aside that it was a provincial jurisdiction. It was not thought about. Then it became a crisis, and suddenly now the federal government is playing this catalytic role, we hope, and pulling its people along with it. Gordon, the piece that you're mentioning about equitable economic development, but also a recognition that that critical minerals, I think you said to me when I first called you, you said, you know, there's not a piece of energy that can be developed in Canada that doesn't touch rural. So we are linked, and we have a housing crisis in rural Canada too.
Absolutely. And also just a little bit, I'm originally from Vancouver.
Right.
And my wife's a doctor. We left Vancouver because Vancouver's failed on two fronts: housing and roads and travels. It no longer provided us a cost of living and a way of life that we wanted. So we moved to rural. So there's a problem with that. But yeah, no, with rural, it is quite a problem. So if you are trying to get healthcare into rural, how do you bring in housing such that you can have doctors and nurses show up and stay there, and it's the quality that they want? Right now, when we first moved here, we had to rent a condo, which we thought was funny. We moved from Vancouver to rural, but the only spot that was available to us was a condo. But the other thing is, a lot of these infrastructure projects that the Liberal government are pointing to your point, are going to happen in rural, and I saw some questions regarding data centers as well. Data centers, they're going to be built in rural mainly because almost all data center failures is because of the grid failed. So you're going to put your data center beside your energy source. So guess what's going to happen in rural, right? And then that brings up a conversation about water. Well, you know, on the prairies, water is so important to our agriculture industry, and they are going through different scarcity spots of where water's falling. Then there's the whole climate change thing. So, for example, like Saskatchewan, we have no choice right now. If you look at where the technology readiness levels are at, we have to continue on with coal. Yet the new carbon, the carbon industrial tax still hasn't exempted our utility from that. And so that is our biggest expenditure, you know, is through our electricity. We'll bring that down to municipal level. Your cost of power is higher. But the other side of the coin is we do have a pathway forward, and that's through nuclear. And again, this affects my community because we're going to get two nuclears. Ontario, I'm sorry to be a Western guy, but it's true.
No, don't apologize, for God's sake. Of course,
Ontario just got all this money to build nuclear power. great. Hi, my hand's up. Can
Right.
you help us out? That's the chosen pathway of our provincial government, considering we don't have hydro, right?
Right.
And we want to get cleaner because that will bring in more investment.
Right.
But yeah, help us out here. So lots of things to
Mary,
talk about.
Mary, can I pick up a point on
Yeah,
rural?
and then Carol, and then Carolyn's trying to get in. Go ahead,
Oh,
Carolyn.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Sean,
okay, and
Sean,
I
don't
think
be
I might
shy.
be
Get your elbows sharp here, okay? Because you got to fight these folks. Airtime.
well, and I think I
Carol,
might be
and then
teeing up
Carolyn.
Sean. So Carolyn, you go in before Sean hits the ball from my tee. The question about rural, like our rural members, and heavy. I sit with rural communities from across the country, and I think it makes the exact point. What our rural members are talking about is trade. They're
Right.
talking about
100%.
energy corridors.
Right.
They're talking about critical minerals and like the infrastructure that needs to enable that. They're talking about how to move energy across this country, right? And so, like, to have a conversation absent the context of enabling the rural communities in which all of these essential nation building conversations sit is really short-sighted. And so I needed to come in here because I think there's a tendency when we talk about rural Canada to think about, these are communities that are struggling to survive, and they're talking about small projects and they're talking about this. It's like, no, they're not. They're talking about how we make advancements in trade. What's going to happen to the canola industry? They're talking about the energy sector. This is the conversation about rural Canada, and it's the energy that we need to harness to get it right.
Well, on the
Then
I'm
same.
this
going to jump in with my elbows here. Here are my
Okay,
Okay,
then
elbows.
I'm
jump in,
after.
Carolyn, and then Gordon, and then Sean. Don't be shy. Go
Okay.
ahead, Carolyn.
Well, I think I want to introduce two phrases that are really important to the conversation we're having. One is regionalism, and I mean that in a very straightforward sense. I just came from a really inspiring workshop with the region of Muskoka, north of Toronto, where folks are struggling to have a home to live in the face of other folks' second and third homes. But what is exciting about Muskoka is that they really are thinking about a region. They're thinking about a portfolio of government land in Huntsville and Bracebridge and Gravenhurst and Baysville, et cetera, et cetera. And taken as a whole, the region of Muskoka has a greater population than PEI or
Right.
all of the territories.
Right.
But when we're talking about rapid housing initiative or we're talking about infrastructure projects, we don't talk about the importance of having regions sort things out. And I think that's going to become increasingly popular or increasingly important, I
And
should say.
Carolyn, just to clarify, that can be done without government. It doesn't have to be formalized in regional government. It can be done.
It can be done entirely through partnerships. And I
Right.
really want, and we're talking about portfolio approach. That's great, but that is Dawn Iveson, frequent friend of the program, talks a lot about that. And I think it's really important to have a regional approach. The other phrase I wanted to introduce into the conversation is spending power. And that's what that's the power of the federal government. It gets the most tax dollars. It has been able, I mean, it's a mixed legacy with the Canada Health Act to go, here's some minimum standards. Here is funding conditional on. One of the things when we're talking about housing, and I think it's coming up a bit in the chat, is absolutely great to have ambitious and necessary building plans. In the meantime, we're putting water in a bathtub that doesn't have a plug in it yet. And when you're talking about preventing homelessness, the provinces are not, and territories are not doing a great job at all, whether it's social assistance or renter protection or health and social supports. There needs to be really good bilateral agreements as part of this infrastructure, as part of this these targets, which, as I say, I don't see in the budget in relation to housing. And if provinces and territories aren't doing it, then the transfers need to be directly to municipalities and regions to get the job done.
I just saw Sean do it. Take a breath. Go, Sean.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm afraid I disagree.
Oh.
And in fact, that is why I think the real solution here is to solve for the arrangement of fiscal federalism more fundamentally. If if people don't like provincial policy, then we have mechanisms for people to challenge provincial policy, right? They're called elections. And so I'm afraid there's a lot of things provincial governments don't do, that do or don't do that I don't like. It seems to me that there's a great tension with our system of federalism that instead of trying to address those issues, we go over them, and use the federal spending power to effectively engineer our own political preferences. So now the way to solve for that, of course, as I say, is to address more fundamentally the system of fiscal federalism, such that provinces have or municipalities have the resources to do what they want, and people can then advocate for change at their respective order of government. But in the meantime, the notion that Ottawa is in a place to make judgments about the right policies for different parts of the country, given regionalism and given the extent to which we have different political preferences and values and so on across different regions in the country or different parts of our country. Yeah, I'm afraid I disagree with that.
John, what happens though if you have a bucket of dough and you create some conditionality around that? So for instance, if we take density and as of right zoning, which was the hot button for a lot of urbanists over the last several years, there have been efforts to make the federal funding conditional to be able to pave the way so that a municipal government or a municipal council won't be able to refute it, because the staff who know what the right thing to do is can say to their councils, if you turn this density proposal down, we will not receive federal funding. Like you can see the chat is blowing up. Good. That's the trade-off. Right? Just a frequent visitor to CityTalk is our colleague Bruce Katz in the US. And Bruce is saying that the Trump administration is basically spurring on the largest decentralizing of resources in the US history, because local governments and states are having to just hunker down and do what they want to do. And I'm interested if you think that there is a workaround, or do we have to actually push the conversation that you're suggesting we should?
For what it's worth, I recognize that my voice here is probably a minority one.
No, there's lots of people on the chat who are coming and supporting you.
But I have apprehensions about using the federal spending power to essentially nationalize areas of policy that are constitutionally devolved to different orders of government. And so I recognize it happens. I recognize all governments do it. I was part of the Harper government. We did it too. This is not a partisan critique. It is more of a philosophical one about how we carry out our system of federalism. I would much prefer one that you would characterize as watertight compartments, but then making sure that the different order of governments have the resources that they need to carry out their responsibilities in a way that reflect the preferences and values and priorities of their respective jurisdictions.
So,
and I'm just gonna jump in with the other perspective, because I got to get it out there.
Please.
There aren't 13 different versions of what universal human rights are. So starting November 17th, Ideas is running the Massey lectures. Alex Neve, I had the privilege of being at his last Massey lecture. We have the right to housing, and we have federal legislation about the right to housing, and we cannot use federalism, especially given that housing isn't even mentioned in the BNA Act. It's just, kind of nobody knows in terms of constitutionalism. Federalism can't be a barrier to the right to housing, and whether it's encampments or whether it's tenant protections.
Is it working? Is it assisting you? Is it working in your favor, Carolyn?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, but there is.
When you say it can't be a barrier, is it actually advancing it? Federalism.
I think when you look at countries, including, let's say, France, which has 3 tiers of government, that's been successful in reducing homelessness and housing need, you see the federal government coming in with some really clear directions for regions and municipalities. Let's put it that way.
I gotta jump in here to say, I think part of the, again, like coming in as pragmatically as possible in this element, like I think we have to solve for, if then, in the system of federalism, obviously different orders of government responsible different things. How do you solve for an order of government that is chronically abandoning its
course.
area of responsibility in a certain section, and one that is critical to advancing national objectives, right? Certainly, I take the point on there are elections to solve for that, but it's a lot, and that's true, right? And I think it's easy to sort of it's a lot to ask of Canadians to understand where the money is being held up necessarily in each of these solutions, right? And I think we have to do both things. We have to, advance a conversation about modernizing the system of fiscal federalism, which could not have foreseen the challenges and realities that we are experiencing now collectively across orders of government. And we have to figure out a way to get past some of these obstacles. We've just lived this. A great example, the safe restart agreements in the pandemic, right? Money was transferred over for very acute reasons and not spent that way, right, by provincial and territorial governments, broadly speaking. And so there is inevitably a challenge, right? If you can build all the houses you want that are deeply affordable without wraparound supports, we're not going to be able to move the needle. And so
that's a perfect example of the dilemma we've got,
Yeah.
where you can create the units and then the province doesn't necessarily come through. Here, can I just change the tack slightly? And Gordon, I'm going to come to you first. One of the things that this budget is laying out, and it's a departure new, is a significant investment in defense. And I'm interested what people's perspective is on how that investment stream can be used in a way to improve the quality of life and the quality of the built environment in places and in cities. Have you given some thought to that, Gordon? I'm assuming you're
absolutely. I'm going to come out at a different angle because through the chat,
Sure.
I think that from now on, we need to include AI and data centers within that conversation.
Okay.
A good example is I was on a panel discussion at the Canadian Nuclear Association West Conference last week, and I brought up the fact that we're going to be using AI to make things more productive, including, say, nuclear power plants, hydroelectric plants, all the supply chain for all that. And if we continue on the path that we are currently on, the data centers and the data that's going to power that will be stored in the United States. The United States does not have a federal law protecting your data. Imagine now it's 10 years or Donald Trump is in power and making the 51 first state comment. And all our power grid, all that power system is all being run by an AI run in the United States. We're in trouble. So the 700 million that they allocated to last year for data centers, great, and now they're saying it's going to be 900. They added 120. It's not enough. And why does that matter to rural? Why does that matter to the municipal conversation? Is that, again, these data centers are going to be built in rural communities, most likely, even when they're on the East Coast, the West Coast, where there's hydro. But the other part is this is an opportunity to solve the digital divide. Carol mentioned about how Western Canada rural, we're all about trade corridors. We are 100% all about trade corridors. We are all about trade. Here's an example. We're going to get the nuclear power plants. This is just an example. Sask Poly announced in Saskatoon 2 weeks ago, they're going to do all their nuclear power training. My community, when they come in and talk about the nuclear power plant, they say, please don't have the red plates build it. Alberta. Right. What that context is because we have such a rural digital divide in education, the rural communities, the people, I'm worried that the people that are unemployed now are still going to be unemployed when we have all this new infrastructure here. And again, what does that mean to municipal? You can imagine. So you can see where I'm coming from, these big pictures and bringing it down. Yeah, we want trade, but we want to be in the trade. Another part on this conversation, you guys were talking about policy. So right now we have the federal government and the provincial government having a discussion and a debate about the clean electricity bill, right? That they're forcing so much onto Saskatchewan without stopping and thinking, what did that mean to a municipal level? My town, Estevan, could be in a ghost town because people who in Ottawa have never visited us didn't understand what does that actually mean to the municipal level when you make these decisions. And we're coming up with our own solutions. Like we're doing coal to graphite, coal to hydrogen, all this stuff. So anyways, that was a whole
Gordon,
Not-
I'm just going to step in. We've only got a few minutes left, and I can appreciate we're kind of just scratching the surface. This is often what happens with City Talk, is it's not the end of a conversation, it's just the beginning. People in the chat saying, hey, I don't really want to talk about fiscal federalism. I want to know whether or not we're building housing for kids, da-da-da. Okay, fair enough. That's the yin and yang of our life, everybody. We have to work at the ground, and we have to work at the 30,000 feet as well. Just as we think about the next 6 months, I mean, assuming the budget gets passed, who knows? But assuming it does, assuming this government pursues this set of priorities, what is your call to the assembled multitude here about what we need to double down on and focus on? You first, Carolyn.
Oh, damn. Look, someone in the chat said quite rightly, we shouldn't be using France as an example of anything right now. But what I will say about France is whether it's a right-wing government, a left-wing government, or complete chaos, it has the same targets and it has the same financing system and it has the same industrial approach to housing. That's what I want to see. Whoever is in power, the damn thing gets built.
So we're on a path. We're on.
I think that we're on the right path, and I can't iterate enough that we need a few more zeros at the end of some of those numbers in order to make that path happen.
Carol, what should we be focusing on next 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a country, we really need to focus on making sure we are good at the core competencies. You know, when you think about the world of risk that we are sitting in, from all different flanks of stressors on the country, making sure that we can do the fundamental things and deliver them well, as efficiently as possible and as quickly as possible, has got to be a core priority. Unfortunately, for lots of folks for whom this conversation is uncomfortable, it means challenging some of the fundamental assumptions about fiscal federalism. And so this is the conversation we need to have. How do we get good at what we need to deliver? And we need to do that fast.
So the delivery piece is really critical. How do you deliver money? And they have created Build Canada Homes, and they have created a strong, what is it? Build communities, strong communities. They've put some buckets in the what's that expression? They've created some buckets. They got some things in the window. Anyway, they are
Now they need to fill them.
Now we need to fill them. Where's the money? Gordon, and then Sean, last word to you. Go ahead, Gordon.
I agree with the zeros, more zeros, but at the same time, like, our deficit's pretty big, and I'm tired of paying so many taxes. I miss the days when we had surplus. So I would say how you implement it is the next steps. Like, come out, talk to people in all these different groups. I know I'm a broken record. I am sorry, but remember to bring in the rural voice.
Yes, and
because
this
that's where you're going to
regional-
be. You're successful.
Yeah, the interdependency and the regional collaboration that you've all been speaking of. We've got to get serious about that. I always worry we can't just wait. We can't wait for someone to do that. We've got to actually initiate that ourselves. Last word to you, Sean.
Yeah, well, I would say the people in this room are have a multiplier effect in terms of bringing to bear these issues and challenges to the world of public policy, but also to Canadians themselves. And so, you know, my message would be twofold. First of all, deliver, head down, focused on delivering on the budget, as Carolyn and Carol and others have said. But then secondly, trying to create the room or the space for that bigger conversation, so that we're not having these same ones 5 or 10 years from now, where Carol and her members are coming to Ottawa trying to persuade the government to give them incremental dollars. That's not how a proud and important part of our system of federalism should have to be able to finance the basic responsibilities they're responsible for delivering on behalf of their residents and citizens.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Sean. Just a reminder, when he said come to Ottawa, folks. We've got the COI Summit on the State of Canada Cities and Places, December 3-4. We'll be in Carrollstown for that. And also we've got other podcasts that have just dropped, one on the downtown east side, one with the Mayor of Barrie about encampments, very complex set of issues, and we'll continue to create programming like that. Thanks for joining us on City Talk. Welcome to Gordon and Sean. It won't be your last visit, just saying, and happy always to see Carolyn back with us to start to just have the beginning of a conversation about what moment are we in with the federal budget 2 days old. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.